Confined Space tells the story of retired Army officer Bern Fortin, who very suddenly leaves his career in the Canadian military and comes to the Kootenays and takes on a job as coroner for the town of Kootenay Landing. In his first case, he's called to the local brewery where a worker has been found floating in a tank of liquid caustic. I've wanted to write a mystery since I was 7 years old, since I read Nancy Drew. I remember reading The Hidden Staircase, the first Nancy Drew book that I read, and putting that book down after being totally immersed in it for a whole afternoon, and realizing that something in me had changed and that I so enjoyed that experience that I wanted to create that experience for other people. I didn't know at the time that that experience and creating it was called being an author. And later on, when I started telling people that, that's what I want to do. I want to be a mystery writer. People get this horrified looks on their faces, right? Just, you can't do that. You can't do that and make a living. I think the Kootenays has a history of people coming here to escape, to start a new life, and often that involves working the land. And certainly that's part of Bern's experience. He's running away from something in this book. We don't know what it is, but he's tormented by his past, and he comes and he buys an acre of land right on the edge of town, and he works the soil. He learns how to garden. He has this Doukhobor neighbor teaching him how to garden. And all of these details that are in the book were things that I had to learn when I moved to the Kootenays. I'd never gardened before. I'd never canned before. I'd never made jam, preserving food. All of those things are very much in the book, and very much, I think, part of what I was learning when I came here, and I was just trying to convey that through the book. The character readers comment most often to me about is Mrs. K, and she is Bern's Doukhobor neighbor. K stands for Kolesnikov, and she is teaching him how to garden. But her lessons are pretty grudging. She doesn't share information too openly. She just lets him know what he needs to know pretty much after he needs to know it, after he's already messed up and done something wrong. And they have quite a lovely relationship, the two of them. He goes to her house pretty much every morning for breakfast. She feeds him copious amounts of food and coffee the way she likes it. And it's really amazing the way that their relationship developed through the course of the book. It was a surprise for me. I really wasn't expecting that she would be such a strong character, and a continuing character who's very present in the sequel as well. So the scene I'm going to read has Bern and Mrs. K and a couple of police officers whose names are Resnick, he's the staff sergeant, and Schilling. She is a fairly new constable to the RCMP in Kootenay Landing. The woman's body lay tangled in knee-high grass. She was splayed out on her stomach, with one arm stretched out before her, one knee tucked under her abdomen, as though she had been reaching, crawling, and had stopped mid-motion. "Don't you live around here?" Resnick asked Bern. Bern gestured to his side gate, just a few hundred feet away. Sunflowers towered over the gateposts, their cheerful heads hanging down. He did not trust himself to speak. 2 bodies in 24 hours was a lot, even for a coroner. "Who found her?" Resnick pointed to the other side of the tracks, where an old woman sat on a tree stump. She was wearing a cardigan sweater, which Bern knew to be hand-knit, and a thick wool skirt. She carried a string bag, empty still. She'd been on her way to town. "Mrs. Kolesnikov," he said. "You know her?" "She's my neighbor." He walked away from Resnick and the young woman in the grass. Mrs. K was with Constable Schilling. Bern nodded at her and sat next to the older woman on the stump. He put his arm around her shoulder. She leaned her head against his chest. Her voice came out in a whisper. "She was just lying there like that. I thought, she gulped down a wail. "I thought it was my granddaughter." "Is it your granddaughter, Mrs. Kolesnikov?" Schilling asked. A shake of gray hair. No, I looked. It's not her," she replied. "But she's so young." She buried her head further into Bern's chest. "So young," she whispered. "Let me walk you home," he said. Bern took her forearm and started toward her house. He saw Resnick from the corner of his eye, raising both hands in a hopeless gesture, but Byrne ignored him. Mrs. K's house was within sight of the body, so he wasn't leaving the scene. Not technically, anyway. Sometimes the living had to come first. I worked at the Columbia Brewery for a couple of years. I had a really interesting job there that took me from one end of the building to the other every single day. So I was in all of the different departments, and in the brewing and in the aging cellars and the bottle line and the can line and the keg line every day pretty much of the week. And so I became really fascinated with the process of brewing, of making beer, of turning water into beer. Water that flows off of the mountains, right? I mean, how perfect for the Kootenays. And part of my job had to do with safety. And the question that really started me off before I knew who any of the characters were or what the actual murder would be was what would happen if all of the safety measures failed at the same time? If all the precautions, if somebody missed a step, or if somebody missed a step and then there was a machine failure, or two things or three things or four things, how many would it take before somebody would die? And that was a question that really started the whole book. And then so many of my experiences in my life to date came into what is now the story. I always see the world through the lens of a crime novelist. And it sounds a little bit scary to say that, but it goes back to taking things to extremes. And so I'm always looking for clues in, everyday life, and often clues are instruments or tools or implements, the candlestick in the billiard room, that kind of thing. So I'm always looking for that kind of information, but even more, I'm interested in people's histories and the stories, and especially stories of conflict. And then if you take those to the extreme and look at what kind of person did someone become because of something that happened to them many years ago, or something that happened to them when they were a child, and then another trauma happened to them as an adult, what kind of person would they become because of that? And those are the questions that really consume me. Somebody came up to me recently and said, "I know exactly where you could stash a body in Ainsworth Hot Springs." And that happens all the time. So I'm not actually the only one thinking these things. I just write them down.